Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this installment of Voices from the Sector. I'm Makia Moody with La Piana Consulting, and today I am overjoyed to have this conversation with Carmen Rojas and Starsky Wilson. The title of our conversation is Begin Again, Urgent Lessons for Philanthropy. So my two guests today really don't need introductions, but for those of you that are new to this work, I will give a little bit of context for who these leaders are. So Carmen Rojas, president of the Marguerite Casey Foundation, is a nationally recognized leader in economic and worker justice and is widely published. So I'm certain that you have seen her on LinkedIn and have followed her on Medium. She has served on several governing boards, including the Marguerite Casey Foundation, General Service Foundation, Neighborhood Funders Group, Workers Benefit Fund, and is on the advisory board of Jolt Texas. In 2014, Carmen founded the Workers Lab, a nonprofit organization which is the nation's leading funder and supporter of new ideas about increasing worker power in the United States. So you already know that you're in for a treat just based on that intro. My other guest is Reverend Dr. Starsky D. Wilson, who is the president and CEO of Deaconess Foundation. He's a pastor, a philanthropist, and an activist who's pursuing God's vision of community marked by justice, peace, and love. He's the board chair for the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, NCRP, the creators of the Power Moves Assessment. If you don't know, you should. And vice chair of the Forum for Theological Exploration, FTE. And so, Carmen, Starsky, I woke up excited to have this conversation with you because you both are quite inspirational and you don't suffer fools. And so I'm excited to dive. I'm just going to keep it real because we've got a lot of ground to cover as we think about beginning again. But in all seriousness, I want to thank you for your inspiration, your leadership, and your authenticity in the philanthropic space. So with that, today's conversation, Begin Again, Urgent Lessons for Philanthropy, is actually inspired in some ways, or in many ways, by this masterpiece by Glaude Jr., Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own. So in the words of John Meacham, this book by Glaude challenges, illuminates, and points us toward, if not a more perfect union, then at least a more just one. And so this conversation between Carmen and Starsky aims to challenge, illuminate, and inspire more just philanthropy. And I'm thrilled to engage with both of you. All right, so in the opening chapter of Begin Again, Glaude writes about, quote, the lie, saying, quote, taken as a whole then, the lie is the mechanism that allows and has always allowed America to avoid facing the truth about its unjust treatment of Black people and how it deforms the soul of the country. The lie cuts deep into the American psyche. It secures our national innocence in the face of the ugliness and evil we have done, end quote. So that's a deep quote. So recognizing that the spoils of philanthropy have been stolen through extraction and exploitation, what would you say is the lie of philanthropy? Who would like to begin?
We could play, I'll go. I'm gonna go. Because we were gonna do like the Zoom staring contest, and I feel like it's not as effective because we're both ready to go.
Ready to go.
What a treat. So first, thank you so much for having me. I'm really so excited to have this conversation. Second, there are a couple of lies of philanthropy. So the first for me is that it's necessary, that we require philanthropy and institutional philanthropy for mass-based social movements. And I think we have millions of examples in the global South where money isn't medicine, but movement is. That social movements are really catalytic. The ability of people to get together behind a unified agenda can transform their lives, our lives, and our future. And so one is the lie that it's necessary. The second, that it's non-ideological, so that the things that we do have no value. So when we fund things like police foundations or charter schools, or even things like affordable housing developments, right? When we take away projects that once lied squarely in the hands of government and believe that our institutions are can invest enough and are doing so for the public good, that is a non-ideological project, and it's a deeply ideological project. The third is that there is no, that there are no losers, right? Like the vast majority of our institutions and our institutional leaders love to tell the story of the victim without telling the story of the victor. The people who get rich, the people who eat, the people who breathe on the backs of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, API, queer folks. I think that we have an obsession with the victim, so much so, and a desire for proximity to victors in ways that undermines our ability to be catalytic for the social change that we want to see. So those are the three things that for me feel like the most visible lies, the most tangible lies, and that I, as a leader in this sector now, am really working to hold myself accountable to. Like, it's really seductive. It's great to tell the story of the victim that then, you know, arose out of the ashes and survived. But you can't tell that story without telling the story of the people who are day to day getting rich on the death of our communities.
Yeah. So I'm with that. Total agreement. First agreement with appreciation to be on this conversation, get to rock with Makia and with you, Carmen. And then, you know, that was the whole sermon. So where I come from, the sermon only needs 3 moves, and you got them all. But so this will be my reflections on the sermon.
I love this.
You know, when Glaude gets into this, he starts off by telling the story of when Jimmy Baldwin meets Stokely Carmichael for the first time as a student at Howard University. And Stokely Carmichael, who was recently dejected, disrespected, and dissed by the President of the United States, former President of the United States, in the midst of a funeral, no less. But anyway, this Howard University student, he commits to this gaggle of students who are giving them their whole selves and their whole lives and risking themselves to make a better America in the midst of the nonviolent movement in the 1960s. He says to them, he commits to them, I will never betray you, right? Mm-hmm. The first lie of philanthropy, which is really connected to me to what Carmen was saying about telling the story of the victim without the story of the victor, is that the first lie is that philanthropy has never betrayed the people. The reality is we abide and we exist in many ways because of that betrayal. And without the capacity to tell the truth about that betrayal, we will not hold ourselves accountable to what is required to do ourselves over, to be anew. When I say that, I'm talking about us personally, and I'm talking about the professions in which we engage in the context of philanthropy. We're actually not going to do that work well if we don't come face to face with the fact that we exist because of betrayal. Mm-hmm. And times in which we have individually, personally, and professionally betrayed in order, quite frankly, in some cases, in order to get the amount of influence or authority within the sector or within our organizations, we betrayed the people to logic models. We betrayed the people to theories of change. We betrayed people to all of the implements of white dominant culture and all the implements of the social sector that we, by the way, created to hold the organizations accountable. So the first lie is that we never betrayed the people. I'll just leave that one, and I'll say the reason why we tell that lie is because we haven't done the other thing that Glaude says that Jimmy Baldwin was very committed to, which is getting away, whether it's to Istanbul or to Paris, to see America from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So we get into philanthropy and we refuse to see philanthropy from elsewhere. You know, they tell, you know, I'm a preacher, here we go, right? What's the problem with the prodigal son? The 3 problems with the prodigal son is he left too soon, he went too far, and he stayed too long. The reality is that's the situation with us in philanthropy. Many folks jump into the place of grant making too soon, having not spent enough time with their own experiences on the ground, not having spent enough time doing the actual work, realizing that philanthropy is not the work. Philanthropy supports the work. The work is the work. Some of us left too soon. We stayed too long. We stay in position so long, we get comfortable, we start shifting our worldviews about what is possible, what is not possible. We give ourselves over to incrementalism, and we stay too long. And clearly we go too far. We go so far as to believe that we can actually transform and change the entire world on what's in our portfolio, if not in our grant making portfolio, if not what's in our investment portfolio.
That's right.
Way too far. And so I think this is the piece. We've got to get to a space where we can see ourselves from outside of ourselves. We got to see philanthropy from other people's perspective, which means we can't stay too long. We actually have to get out of this work to see this work. We got to find ways to dip in and out of it every now and then to stay close enough to hold ourselves accountable to where the real work is happening.
There was so much in that I don't actually want to go to my next question. I wonder if, because I saw you acknowledging and affirming what he was saying, Carmen. I'm not sure if you had anything else to say in addition to that.
I mean, I think like the most practical example for me is like our relationship with government. Like if I think about the number of times that I, as somebody who ran an organization and needed to raise money, sat in a meeting with a funder who used, who was on paper and on their website and in their collateral a justice funder, but often tied themselves to language of a overly bureaucratic government. Government can't get that done. It's impossible. Adapting and adopting norms of the right wing in this country without seeking to actually bolster or harness the true power of a functioning state. Like the problems we're facing today with, I'm like obsessed right now with the US Postal Service as a foundation that was founded really because of UPS, right? Like our foundation, Marguerite Casey, is the sister of Jim Casey. Jim Casey was a founder of UPS. And understanding how this private institution, there's like, could not be a more perfect example today of our existence because of the betrayal. It exists because UPS went public, and today we are experiencing a crisis. We're not experiencing, it is becoming visible, a crisis that's 40 years in the making, that people in our institutions could have made a bunch of different choices about, but we don't live in rural places. We're not like worried about our medicine coming to our door. We're not, our ability to access, I'll speak to myself, like my class position is far different than any other Latinx person that I know. And that's crazy. And I should not be determining whether or not, we have a functioning postal service. And so I should see my role in this institution not as reifying how this money came to be through the story of Jim Casey and UPS and the hard work in the Pony Express. I should instead be thinking about, one, holding the contradiction that I exist in this role because of Jim Casey, but on the other end, that it's then my job to expose the ways in which, by undermining our civic infrastructure, by hollowing out our government, by not paying enough taxes, UPS needs to exist in the place of the US Postal Service. And that's going to be really detrimental to our democracy. That just, there's no true trade-off there. And so I feel like there are a million ways, as Starsky was speaking, that I was like, oh yeah, no, I see the places of betrayal. And today we do exist. Like I'm not trying to give up this job. I'm not trying to give up this role. I think that there's a really interesting conversation about spend down. And today in this country, if you are a progressive funder, I think we play a really critical and necessary role, not in advancing social movements, but at the very least, creating a more even playing field for our leaders to contest for power if we do it right. And so I feel like Starsky and I have a thing. So anything he says, I'm going to be like, yes to those things. And I'm hoping.
Same way, same way.
I am indeed a connector, and I am enjoying being a part of this stool. So I think something you alluded to, Carmen, was about the origin story of the Marguerite Casey Foundation, and you mentioned the contradiction and or the tension where like you exist in a space where there is tension that you're holding. I'm wondering, Starsky, if you can speak to the origin story of the Deaconess Foundation and if there are any tensions that you're holding given the, I guess, significance of racialized capital, and what that might mean for beginning again as you think about your work.
Yeah, I mean, so Deaconess is interesting because so 130 years ago, German immigrants started the Evangelical Deaconess Society of St. Louis because they didn't speak the language, and in St. Louis, they wouldn't be treated at City Hospital. Literally, the heritage tells a story of them having to self-administer their medicines because they were essentially untouchables. And so what they did was they decided they would actually convene under the umbrella of the church, men and women together, lay leaders and clergy together, things that were pushing up against and subversive in the time, quite frankly. And they would set up homes where women would dedicate their lives to learning nursing and theological training, and they would live with the infirm so that they didn't have to go be maltreated in the hospital system. Mm-hmm. Over the years, these immigrants created what became a multi-site hospital system, 5-hospital system, a nursing school, a school for deaconesses, multiple sites over time, in order to respond to the fact that the systems of care did not care about them because they didn't speak the language, right? And so I tell that story because there are really powerful elements of justice around that. It was a woman who first led the mission. The tension is there ain't been a woman to lead the mission since then.
Wow.
Tensions in that a woman gave the first property that became the first home. Tensions in the fact that these same Germans have become white. And over time, their sense of marginalization, I tell this story in church settings with folks of this German heritage, because they now, in many ways, and over time and tension, I pastored a church out of the same tradition, where members of that church were engaged in one of the biggest race riots right across the street from my church with the desire to integrate the public pool in the 1960s. And so the other tension is, right, we exchange our marginalization for the marks of privilege, and we forget those that we are leaving out. And ultimately, the foundation itself was created in the late 1990s with the sale of that hospital system to a for-profit entity to create the proceeds of the sale. From the proceeds from that sale created the core of the foundation. And so we've sought to advance child well-being based upon the advancement of a corporate entity that's making money off of people's sickness. So there's a way in which all of these realities have to continue to be told, and there are ways in which we may never chase down those evil spirits, right? And so at the very least, we better run faster to wrestle with the realities of our origin stories.
Wow. There's so many layers in hearing both of you speak. So sticking with the theme of tension and contradiction, I'm thinking about how there's many foundations that talk about making safe bets and how they might tinker with innovation. And I keep using air quotes because there's so many bumper sticker phrases that are just rampant in philanthropy. And so I'm wondering, as you think about I guess, juxtaposing what this tax-free capital, this inordinate amount of resources can actually do to catalyze dreams with how those same power brokers don't really want to contest for power and are figuring out how to essentially hoard a lot of those resources. How you might think about, I guess, challenging and or disrupting the capitalistic culture in which your foundations occupy space. So I guess my question is really around something related to pragmatism in a sense, and how you get out of the construct in which you're trying to change the same construct. Is that a clear question? I feel like that probably...
I mean, that question makes sense. For me, it makes sense, right? Like it's, one, like I think that, again, this is where it's deeply ideological. The fact that we use the language of risk for free money is idiotic. It's like, honestly, the dumbest thing ever. If our institutions don't exist because, and I don't think that, for me, the endeavor is not to like realize somebody's individual dreams. It's emancipation. It is like true freedom. This is a project of liberation. So I am really committed to supporting leaders who, with some resources, can start to plant the seeds of what freedom feels like, tastes like, the vibrancy of the color in freedom, to start to seed in our imagination what a tapestry of freedom looks like, so that as we are on this journey, there's like a well that we can draw on for that to happen. And you can't do that trying to using the language of not only capitalism, of business broadly, the norms of business. And if this institution exists for 200 years, if Marguerite Casey exists for 200 years, and people are worse off, I would not have done my job. My board, I should be held accountable. My children should be held accountable. My nieces and nephews should be held accountable, because this is true dream space, right? So the language of risk is not super helpful. The language of pragmatism or safe bet, there is no safe bet. They're like, what are you, though that's like a contradiction in terms. It's either a bet or it's safe. So you can't do both of those things at the same time. And we do not know. When I took this job, there was no pandemic, no economic crisis, no murder of George Floyd, and I was 1,000% clear that Black people in this country were disposable by the state, that they were being targeted by the police, that our institutions were consistently failing them. And so even I just needed an ignition, and I'm living in that ignition right now. And many of us are waiting for another ignition, right? So there's a lot of celebration and pomp and circumstance of people giving out money today. Where the fuck were they? Like, what? The problems are not different. The problems are not different. The fact that it took literally the trifecta of the three most unimaginable things in the world to happen, again, on the backs of our most vulnerable people, for you to say, oh yeah, like, let me figure out how I'm gonna get some money out. That's not something to be celebrated. The thing to be celebrated is the person that 5 years ago, the institution that 7 years ago, our institution. You know, I always think about Luce at Marguerite Casey and the ability to create an institution that 15 years ago was like, you know what, we're just gonna give multi-year general operating support. We have grantees that have been getting money for 15 years. General operating support, was it perfect? No. But could you imagine that there was a time when that was a norm, and that today it's still not a norm in this crisis? That's the thing to be celebrated. And I think that there's a way in which we've kind of sort of backed ourselves into a corner. And again, this is where ideology for me is super important. The right doesn't do that. They're clear they're making bets, and they make huge bets, tremendous bets. And 99% of them fail. And it just takes one. It takes one economist in Virginia to actually talk about the failure of government and to write all these stupid reports that actually went nowhere, but started to seed in our imagination the logic of the working poor. This idea that you can be working and poor at the same time. It just takes one person, the right to life. Imagine the person who was like, you know what, let's actually just talk about it like this and not talk about the range of reproductive consequences borne by women in this country because somebody made a big bet on an idea. And I think for us, we really have to move away from that. We're not producers of things. We should not be the audience of people. We should be creating evidence for our communities that freedom is possible and be an animating force, be the gasoline in the tank for them to realize that.
Yeah, I love this because you helped me out of my pragmatic answer. I was gonna, I had this. I'll share it, right? So somebody needs this, right? So this will help somebody. So every now and then, regularly in organizational life, perpetuity needs to be put on the table, right? So if we want to talk about safe bets and risk, we have to regularly then, in institutional cycle, put the life future of the institution on the table. Otherwise, we'll never go far enough, right? We may never go to the point of spin down, but we do need to go. We need to use that as a way to frame deeper investment and more venturesome investment. Excuse even that language that has been shaped into the business foray. But I want to get into the more human piece that Carmen led to, which is this idea of creation, right? That I like the word conjure, actually. I think we need some space to conjure that which is not in order that it might someday be. So I'll go back to Jimmy Baldwin here. I wish I had some Jameson. I feel better about it. Right? Part of what he was up to, he used the language of New Jerusalem, right? He was using this biblical language of New Jerusalem, another space, right? He wasn't talking about, I appreciate Meacham for, honoring the book. He wasn't talking about perfecting the union. He was actually talking about creating a whole new thing, starting over, doing the first works over. And I think we only get to the point, we only break our way out of incrementalism, we only break our way out of the theories, we only break our way out of these process elements if we will stop and just go to conjure something that is wholly other. And to be right for this kind of moment, we do have to conjure that is wholly other. This trifecta that Carmen talks about, that, we quite frankly, we knew one of these was coming. This time last year, 3 out of 4 economists suggested that an economic correction would happen before the first quarter of next year. Let's be clear. People, these corporations had their layoff plans ready for an economic correction this year anyway, which is how they got them done so quickly. That's how they knew who to furlough. Folks were on the record about that. What people were not ready for was an uprising in the streets in the health pandemic at the same time that finally would expose the deep mediocrity of the white maleness that led our country and continues to lead our country, right? White men being shown to be so deeply mediocre right now, not being able to respond to these realities. But we have not fully conjured what it means to live in a world that is led by the creative impulses of the women who keep saving our damn democracy every few years, right? And so I think part of what we got to do is create the containers. We got to support philanthropy, support the containers that give people the space to conjure a being without racialized capitalism. We have to, in order to risk that, we've got to put ourselves on the table. But more than anything else, we have to get out of these comfortable spaces in order to be able to do that. And I think this is the work, this is what I hear. I hope I'm hitting the note right, Carmen. This is what I hear you when you talk about supporting leaders and not institutions and not programs, but just, giving folks the room to connect. And the word create gets to me because I still believe that we're reflections of a creator, right? However you understand that. And so we're most human when we are creating. And we'll get closest to the humanity and to the dignity that we desire when we have containers where people can be most human and conjure and create that world that ultimately is better for all of us.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, you know what, Starsky? I feel like at some point in college, this was actually in high school. I went to community college, but in late high school, early community college, I had fancied myself to be a spoken word artist. And I feel like you and I would have been a really great tag team. I just want to put that out there. We're not going to have these jobs forever. There may be a future that we have in a creative space. But I do, all joking aside, I think that that's really it. Like, we can't be, this can't be for us. Like, for all intents and purposes, I always tell, I did an interview last week and the guy had like gone back to read and hear things that I'd said. And I always tell this story about my mom, and my mom has a really amazing story. And there are two ways that story could be told. One is in, that's reflective of this more perfect union, right? Like my mom came, she worked really hard, it was transformative, and now I exist. With no situational awareness and without the ability to talk about creativity and power. You know, my mom's a white looking Latina who immigrated at the peak of the civil rights movement, peak of the feminist movement, when employers were making six times as much as their lowest paid employee across the board. So she had benefited, and I was always told the story of benefiting from a context, and we are often told the story of benefiting from ourselves. Like there's like we are born with a full tank, and whether or not we choose to use the gas in the right way is up to us, and that's just dumb, right? And so like a dumb framing, it's not super helpful, it's untrue, it makes people suffer. You know, like if you talk to, you know, Workers Lab was an amazing experience for me for a whole host of reasons. But one of the things I always think about is that when we would interview people after we did anything, everybody could talk about the reason that they were poor and working. And it was like the suffering that they carried, right? They made a choice. Their parents did something, but that thing meant that they were had to resign to a whole life of suffering. But we don't do that kind of justice work of expose, again, the victors or the systems or the choices that make it so that poor and working can coexist in a context where it's not necessary. It's actually not necessary anywhere, but in the United States, it's definitely not necessary. And so, yeah, I feel like, we could do this all day.
Where I come from, you always need a side hustle. So we ain't got to wait until these jobs. Like we could do this on the road now.
I'm glad I could be here to say I witnessed this moment. So actually, you spoke a little bit, Carmen, about the interviewer from last week who kind of like dug out your receipts related to things you've written. So I want to actually quote you as a prelude to my next question, which is from the piece you wrote called "The Problems with Philanthropy and What We Can Do to Fix Them." And you said, I quote, "I dream more about ending racial capitalism than I do about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I dream a lot about us and the greatness that we can achieve when giving to and of each other is incentive enough," end quote. And so my question for both of you is, Starsky, you talked about this container for philanthropy. I'm wondering, to begin again, what would be the preconditions or the fertile soil on which you would want to be planting your space to be creative and to conjure up this new future? How about you go first, Starsky?
Yeah, I mean, the first is just community. Like I remember, I mean, one of the things I know, like I've been the same dude most of my life, and clearly most of my adult life. Events have changed me, but a lot of people in philanthropy only know my name because Michael Brown Jr. lay in the street for 4.5 hours, right? People know me because of a dead Black boy. And so it's important for me to think about how God shaped me in that moment and what were the things that I heard and got to know in that moment about building community. And one of the things that I heard up close in a conversation with Philanthropy from the Ground, because St. Louis was largely flyover territory, people didn't ask people in St. Louis what they needed or what they wanted. They asked other people who like movement adjacent or in the movement, what do we need to do about Ferguson, right? So in one of these conversations with Philanthropy, Phil Agnew, Dream Defenders, dear brother, comes and Philanthropy's asking, what do you need? Da, da, da. He said, look, what I don't need is to bring Dream Defenders to Ferguson. What I need is for you to hook me up with Tef Poe, who was doing work here in Ferguson. He said, give me and Tef, and give me the baddest organizer in environmentalism, give me the baddest person who's doing work around juvenile justice, and give me the baddest person, and just put us off somewhere in a retreat center by ourselves and give us 3 weeks and we'll figure it out. So part of it was, right, it's not a sense of wanting to duplicate anything that we've done, but it's desire for deep community and space to be with one another. And so, so what I learned from Phil in that moment is that I don't have to have the answers as long as I can identify with others, even if I can't identify the others, to be in space and in community, to then build with one another and to conjure. And so I think that's what I would build it on more than anything else. And quite frankly, we need time to forget some of the things that we've learned so deeply. This idea, Carmen was reminding me of this, like the benefit of self and how we learn this responsibility that we have to build for ourselves. You know, I needed Ferguson to rob me of, I was 3 years into my leadership at the foundation. I followed a retiring straight white male clergy person in his 60s. And I spent the first 3 years trying to convince people that I knew how to do this job like a middle-aged white man. And so I needed an uprising in my community and in my spirit to liberate me from trying to do it. Now I could, because I've been taught all the marks, right? I came up in a context in an era that taught me how to do it. I went to a historically Black college and university with the required course in public speaking, with the required segment in code switching. I got it. I know how to do it. But I needed to forget it in the context of the movement in the interest of liberation of my people. So we need community and we need space to forget some of the foolishness that has been so deeply embedded in each and every one of us. So that we can dream a new dream and think of something different, find our new Jerusalem, and not try to perfect this union, but actually try to build the first multiracial democracy that the globe has ever known, because America ain't never been here. Right? And then think about how we orient philanthropy or the social sector to serve that, not this.
Mic check 1 2 1 2. You up next, Carmen.
I know. So I want to tell a story, but then I want to talk about the Medium post really quickly, and then I want to talk about this is Marguerite Casey Foundation and Workers Lab, and this idea of the training necessary to get these jobs. So the challenge for me is that we are so comfortable in philanthropy talking about DEI, IED, EID. Like if I get another 3-letter acronym that's about getting more Black and brown folks into these jobs without actually talking about power, I'm gonna be annoyed. Like I'm just generally annoyed now when white donors and foundations, talk about numbers of people getting money without talking about the ways that we as leaders and institutions can actually make it harder for our folks to get free. That like, if you didn't know anything of me, I could be just as problematic and even more problematic than a white leader who isn't committed to the freedom of my community, of us. And so that piece for me was a need to call out the ways that philanthropy has become the power as opposed to becoming the catalyst by which people and communities become more powerful. We have tried to make deals, we've tried to pay for change, we've like tried to like invest in change making, hoping for a return. We've been more focused on protecting our perpetuity than in actually doing whatever it takes to make our people more powerful. This is a game of power. We are living in a world where power is exchanged every day, but somehow philanthropy in its holding of power has removed power from our lexicon. It has said everything. Now you see more people talking about power, but not the ways in which we hold power and audience and capture movements in ways that this thing doesn't happen, right? Like this thing of people coming together in a room and just being in a depth of really falling in love with each other. We don't make room for that to happen. We don't, we actually see that as tertiary, maybe as a part of this endeavor, and instead want to do strategic philanthropy or like have silos. We want to fund economic justice without talking about gender or race. We want to fund schools and education without talking about homelessness or without even having a sense of the ways that these issues all manifest in a tethered way as like a heavy blanket in people's lives. And we aren't trying to take the blanket off. We're trying to pull the thread of the blanket, which is just stupid. Starsky, I love that this like unlearning, because I also, I have all my paperwork in order. I'm always like, I got my degree here, I did my Fulbright over there. And I was really lucky. I had a group of teachers who from, you know, K through 12, community college, graduate school, believed in freedom and believed that I had a light inside of me that may not be the light of freedom, but can be one of many lights. I could be, what are these light bugs called?
Lightning bugs where we can.
Yeah. I could be one in a community, not to be captured. And when I was building Workers Lab, I kept thinking, when I was in undergrad, I studied Black women's social movements in Latin America. And we studied in Brazil, there were these places called quilombos, and quilombos were free territories. They were places where previously enslaved people would go and create a free territory. Like they would create co-governance, they would have their own communities. And the idea of the quilombo as the place that we can create. And so when I built Workers Lab, there was never a thought for me of, we were always the queerest, the brownest, the most immigrantist, the most public schoolish, economic people to walk into a room. So on the one side, the people who were dominating the conversation about who makes our economy better, who can actually make a representative economy, never represented me. And so I wanted to build an institution that could do that and that could create room for young leaders, for leaders generally, but for specifically leaders of color to feel like they can do this unlearning. Because I was really hemmed up. Like I don't have the moment that you have, Starsky, but I have a bunch of moments tethered together where I could feel like my elbow would like reach the end. And I'd be like, oh no, I just have to stay right here in the chair. This is how I talk. Don't be too emotive. Don't laugh too loud. Don't cry. And realizing how, again, a fork in the road. I could have made the choice that by tying myself so tightly, I got this great job. And I made a different choice, which was, I reached the end of what was possible in my imagination, because very few people told me to like pull at the hem or pull at the seam so that I could stretch out fully, so that my imagination can run wild and crazy and free. So I can imagine somebody like my mom, right, who graduated from middle school, coming to this country, working really hard, retiring and barely making ends meet. So I can imagine a world where that is true and where she has the power to change that conditions with my aunts and uncles, with the people we grew up with Starsky's parents, where I could imagine that. But that was just, I just had reached the end of that, right? And I think that there's this hemming up is something that we at Marguerite Casey Foundation right now are talking a lot about in terms of our hiring practice, right? Like there is no philanthropic, like you're a good funder. What does that mean? I don't understand. And I keep getting advice, especially as we're thinking about hiring, that they're like good funders. And I'm like, I want to know, like, is the practice of diligence and requirement and tying people up tighter? Because that's not really what I want. Like, I'm more interested in like the creative spirit in people, again, this uncontained creativity, like the ability to actually imagine Starsky and I being the most absolutely normal people to be leading in these institutions and leaving these institutions, right? That this is a place where we gather enough oxygen and water to be able to take the next step somewhere else to truly contest for power.
Feel a wind just blowing in New Hampshire thanks to this conversation. So you both have referenced power a number of times, and Starsky, I know that, well, I've had the benefit of working with Deaconess Foundation on the Power Moves assessment, where you're actually interrogating power and thinking about how you can show up differently in spaces to build, share, and wield power. And I'm wondering if you can offer any reflections about that process and or how your conceptualization of power as a funder has changed over time.
Yeah, I mean, the first piece, it really is what I referenced before, is this attempt to see ourselves from elsewhere. Power Moves is really about what other people think of you. So they get a little bit of a primer about what you say you're about, and then they get to tell you. And it's much more, we've used other tools, it's more open-ended, gives people more space to really reflect on all the things we say we want to do. And because we both advocate with our voice, try to build with our funding, and we convene people in our community action tank, it really gave us an opportunity to see all these different angles at who we are. The most significant piece is, once people tell you who you are, your first response is a desire to defend. I want to explain things where they didn't give us glowing responses and reactions. They just must not know enough about this thing that we're doing over here. So we should consider our communications and whether we're talking to people about something. So part of it is about being able to step outside of yourself and giving people the room to tell you stuff. So not just basic surveys, but being able to dig in and let people just talk. And then being able to hear that without engaging your first response, which is to defend. And so I say that to say, I believe we will be more powerful on the other side of this because we were more vulnerable at the information. And so I think there is a connection between that I would not have made before, right? I shaped, nurtured, misguided by great man theory, right? And just own my stuff, right? This recognition that you actually gain power by being more vulnerable, and wrestling with that moment where I think all power is bad and I think I've got to come against it. This has all been a part of my journey. But what I would say now is I realize more and more that, well, I have a personal sense that my vocation is as a placeholder for folks who, and that where I've got to be is, yes, I've got to contest for power. Yes, I should be in spaces of influence. I should be in those to hold them. So the vulnerability is that I should be in those places and hold them for those for whom it's really prepared. It's not for me. So the more I learn about myself and about this work, the more I feel the need to open up and share. And the more I recognize that it's not for me, that I was just here to crack the door a little bit for the who really couldn't get in when I got in, or for the people who should be there. And so I'm still on that journey, but I know, if nothing else, that I understand power more because I'm more vulnerable. And part of that vulnerability is recognizing that I've not yet seen the place I'm supposed to land, but I shouldn't be in any of these places too long.
So I hear your endorsement, Carmen. Not sure if you feel compelled to say anything before
I feel like we've known each other at different times, right? Like I wish this was not a pandemic time and we were doing this in person. Very few people talk about it in this way, in this like holding a space, but I feel like that too. I have a genuine commitment in not retiring in this job. I have a genuine commitment of making sure that the people I bring into the foundation leave free to do whatever they want to do. You know, like that they see this as like a respite. Our people don't have room to rest, and these jobs are great jobs. I have a friend who calls them the 1%er jobs, and they are. You know, I am for all intents and purposes. Like, and I'm not gonna lie about it. I'm not gonna be like, oh, it's so hard and struggling. I wake up every day thinking about how I'm gonna give away this money. Could you imagine?
You actually say that stuff.
No, I'm clear. Like when people talk about like the weight of philanthropy, I'm like, what are you talking? You don't know what hard is. You can't pull hard from your DNA, and that's the problem. Is that I could pull hard from my DNA. Like I can picture hard right now. I have like the moment. And so this is the place of respite. And so I don't want to be here forever. So I love this idea of holding the door open or holding the space. I am also clear that I have a creative edge. You know, like I'm a materialist, right? So I have a creative edge. I know where that edge ends, and I need somebodies. I want to create a universe where that's not the only edge. You know, like where like a shift of material well-being is the only thing that's going to like lead us to liberation, but it's going to be creativity. It's going to be music. This is on my spirit. It's going to be falling in love with each other again. And I just don't, that's even like the fact that I have to justify it before it comes out of my mouth is a signal to me that like, oh yeah, you just, that's something for you, friends. But I think we need to be honest about that. I think that these should be tenured positions, that like they should be like, okay, you're here for X number of years and then you go and do something else. We've filled up our well in these jobs and understood more in these jobs. We've been able to grapple and sit at a table that neither of us would have been invited to in these jobs. We like found the seam and ripped it open in these jobs, but it shouldn't be for us forever. And the way that you describe it is the way that I feel it. And so my reaction is really that, and just like a true feeling of responsibility for people who were born 10 years younger, who are 10 years later than I was born, right? Who have gone through college through an economic crisis, who have seen their parents lose their homes and their jobs, not once, maybe twice, oftentimes 3 times, for whom housing is precarious at best and ever moving as a target at its worst, for whom access to quality healthcare and education is aspirational, but doesn't feel like at their fingertips. I want to create room for people who have lived that life to breathe and to imagine, to reach the creative edge. And I did the paperwork already. So who cares? Like, I don't need anybody. I don't need like a Harvard graduate. I don't need a PhD. I am most interested. Jonathan J.S. Green, who's our VP of programs, founded an organization called UndocuBlack. They're queer, went to the Warren campaign. He's in his late 20s, and we have this conversation a lot about how people in his position and other institutions oftentimes are surprised that he has this job. And I am the least surprised. I'm like, oh, you know how politics works? You have a clear assessment of power. You've built something. So you know You know, you had seams, but in your early 20s, you pulled the thread and like stretched out. So he's a perfect person to do this job. And that's who I believe, you know, is our future, like a future for our democracy, the future for our economy. And I want to create an enabling environment for that. I don't think it's a leading by leading. I think it's a leading by container.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
So this has been such a fulfilling conversation, and I'm going to ask the final question before giving you the opportunity to have like your last word, whatever you want that to be. But over the last 3 years, I've interviewed Black women that are leading in the social sector as part of Black and Bold Perspectives on Leadership. And I want to borrow one of the questions from those conversations for both of you to consider. And I feel like in this conversation, you've alluded to them in different ways already. But the question is, what type of ancestor do you want to be and why?
Yeah, this is hard. More than anything, I don't know why, but this may not be a really good answer, but I just want to be remembered. I wrestle with whether that is like an ego trip or whether that's this reality that the people that I remember, the people whose names I lift, I don't always know why, but they just meant something. They mean different things to different people. I hear people, I've lived in St. Louis for 20 years, people tell me stories about people who I never met. They tell me different types of stories based upon who's telling the story, but different people are telling stories about them. And so it just means that they've impacted different lives in different ways. So, my desire is just not to be forgotten. Because I think those who are forgotten, I just want to be remembered. That's all. I don't know how that's to be. In some ways, I don't care, but I feel like if somebody remembers, then I've had some impact.
I really love Toni Morrison, like so much, like for a lot of reasons. Like it was her writing that invited me to see Black people not through the eyes of non-Black people. It was like it was such a light in my. I started off in school studying English, and it was her writing was so helpful for me. As I started to learn more about Toni Morrison, the thing that struck me most was her writing was powerful, but she was a true container. Like she created an enabling environment for Muhammad Ali to write his book, for Angela Davis to write her book, that she created room in like a seamless and unburdened way. She wanted to tell, and for others to tell the stories of Black people that weren't owned. That like she didn't have to be the only narrator of this long, fraught and powerful and loving history of Black people in this country. She wanted to create room for more people to add their yarn to the tapestry. And I love that. I aspire to that. I aspire to being the type of leader that may not be remembered in that way, but will have created a room. I kept on thinking, Starsky, I kept on thinking about like people whose smell I remember. Like I may not remember their name. I'm really bad at people's names, but I know like my mom loved this perfume from the mall called McGriff. And it was not great, but she was really about it. Like we would go to the whole thing, like every year she'd like a lotion set, like the whole thing. And I could remember that smell, and like it brings, it's like when you open a package from Latin America, it has this smell. That's how I want to be remembered, right? Like, I don't really care if it's my name. I don't care if it's like that thing I did. I don't care if it's a Medium post or the tweet or whatever article or interview. I want to be remembered like that. Like, the ability to transport by the senses is such a powerful thing in memory. And I think it's under, in a sector that is so obsessed with everybody being a leader. I'm not really leaderful in that way. I want to be like McGriff. I want to be like the smell that you're like, oh yeah, this is her. And I just recently did this because I took this job, but I've been asking people, especially people from Workers Lab, to help me understand where I can get better now, and to help my current team understand like my weaknesses. And it's been so fascinating because it's like the core set of things that you're remembered by, right? Like, I have a loud laugh that will like sneak up on you, that I get upset. And then the moment I tell you that I'm upset, I forget that I was ever upset at you. So it may feel bigger to you than it'll ever feel to me. And so there are those kinds of things, Starsky, that I feel like today we are building in our relationships, in our institutions, in our building, that are starting to see the smell, that are starting to see the remembering that we both want.
Yeah. I also I know we're headed toward the end, but I just feel compelled of it. Allison Brown is, we lost Allison over the weekend, and she was the executive director of the Communities for Just Schools Fund. And I came to know Allison because of the broader work in Ferguson, but got connected to her as she was doing some transitional work. She had been at Open Society Foundations and then leads this collaborative. And she's just the kind of light in our sector, just kind of this caring spirit about people that didn't hold the paperwork close. She had all the paperwork, but didn't lead with that. And so, you know, she's become an ancestor. It hit me hard and heavy over the weekend, mainly because of the kind of guilt of not knowing all that she was holding. But my commitment was to lift her name high and to remember her light. And so you talk about what kind of ancestor, I also think of Allison as one who has become an ancestor too soon, and whose light I want to hold up. Yeah.
Thank you. I wish I had some sage to burn. No, because there's something in the atmosphere, just based on being a part of this conversation and hearing you both, you know, trade beats and pass the mic back and forth around really complicated and also beautiful tensions that you've lifted up related to philanthropy and the opportunity to begin again. And so I just want to express my immense gratitude for taking the time to speak with me, and I wish you all good things in the week and months to come.